Hi everyone, I'm Amira and I'm currently working as a freelance graphic designer in Oslo, and I was a student in Dani's type class and she was my supervisor for my FYP. So today I'll be talking about a drop cap assignment I did for Dani's type class. The assignment was to design a typeface inspired by illuminated initials. The first part of the assignment was to do some research on the illuminated initials and go through old manuscripts. I then became inspired by French manuscripts that had these elaborate characters and drawings that formed the drop cap letters. I thought it was interesting that I did not have to read these books to get an idea of what the narrative is about. The single letter on its own portrayed a narrative, and some of them interacted with the rest of the page, such as these ones that have extended descenders, or this P letter that has an ear that goes out of the frame. I was also inspired by Hansha, I think that's how you pronounce her name, a Dutch graphic designer that Dani introduced to us in class. She uses complex patterns and intricate lines in typography, and I was intrigued by the fine details that could form legible letters and studied how she uses these patterns to convey a narrative. These two sources, the manuscripts and Hansha, were very different from each other aesthetically, but they both somehow communicated a narrative without having to read the text. Like, for example, in this work that she did that kind of conveys the idea of wind. And then for this assignment, I chose the theme Greek mythology because I was interested in reading about it at the time and thought that in these stories there's always very distinctive characters or elements that I could use them in my letters. And Greek mythology is still very relevant today because it's somehow still widely interpreted or incorporated in various modern narratives in films and in books and such. And I wanted to combine these old myths with a bit more modern illustrations. And then, as opposed to the examples of the old manuscripts for my research, I decided to do illustrations that are a bit more subtle, so they are not like drawings of the actual characters in the stories with the face and the body and everything. I decided to just extract key elements or creatures in the stories, like certain parts of the creatures in the stories, and only illustrate those distinctive qualities. For example, here in the lightning bolt for the letter Z for Zeus, and the snakes in M for Medusa, but not the character itself. One of the challenges of designing this typeface is definitely legibility. I modeled some of the letters that were inspired by geometric and simple fonts like Futura or Proxima Nova, as I needed very clear letter forms to compensate for the complex details of the illustrations. And another challenge was to make the letters look consistent, that they belong in a family. So I had to make small adjustments here, for example, to fit the letter form, like add or subtract elements that I had initially thought of. And I also used like filler illustrations to improve the legibility so that the letter form is more familiar and easier to read. And I guess my advice for dealing with intricate illustrations while designing a typeface is to ensure that your lines are clean and smooth and that you have few anchor points as possible, especially if you're doing it in Illustrator. For me, I would clean it up on Illustrator first before importing it into a type design software like FontLab or Glyphs. And then I use the paintbrush tool for the illustration, and you can actually double click on the tool and then you get to adjust like the brush fidelity. So if you choose to have a smoother line, you will not give a very accurate drawing based on how you move your cursor or your drawing tablet, but it would create smoother lines. And then also, because these illustrations I did was for a typeface, I made sure to play with symmetry and use the copy and flip horizontally function to my advantage. So it doesn't have to be a unique illustration every time. You can reuse and reapply the illustrations in different ways to form the letter. So this helped make it more legible and more like it belongs in a family, unless you're going for a more experimental look or rough look where the letters don't look exactly the same in width and in height. And then I think the best way to approach this assignment is to first of all pick a topic you are interested in, because you'll be spending a long time on it, and definitely have fun with it and try something you've never done before. You can explore and experiment different methods. It doesn't have to be detailed illustrations. If you're interested in like intricate patterns for typography, you can still do like optical illusions, or use shapes to form patterns, or use thread and photograph it. I don't know, just something you can play with. And then lastly, before I go, I just wanted to share some type related works I've done recently. First is BEC-X, which is a monthly talk that is held at the company I used to work for previously in Oslo. They would invite different experts and enthusiasts of different fields that can be related or unrelated to tech and design, just to inspire the employees and introduce them to different expertise in the industry. And the talks are called BEC-X and will be followed by the company or the name of the person hosting that day. So it could be like BEC-X Spotify or BEC-X Snapchat or something. So I designed these crazy X letters that are vibrant and weird to represent all the potential random topics that they could cover in the future. And the X's were drawn by hand at first, and then I scanned it and imported it into Illustrator, and then I played around with the warp tool to make the X a bit more special. So basically they just used a different X for every for a different subject every time. And then I also did a typography wall for a Japanese restaurant in Singapore that has uni, which is sea urchin, as their specialty dish. And I designed these Japanese characters in the form of the sea urchin's gonads, and designed serifs that look like the sea urchin's spines. And then in the type composition, I used these spines to slice the characters and use the pieces of the characters to form Latin letters to spell out uni. And lastly, I would like to share this project I did for Vox, a non-profit organization that has a literary publication and is meant as a platform for minority voices in Norway. I did their visual identity and redesigned their logo, and the concept of the identity is based on an oval shape that represents a platform or a space, a community, a room. And I incorporated the oval in the letter O of the name Vox to highlight it and make it stand out a bit. And I also played with the oval forms to convey the narrative of the brand and use it in replacement of the O in the name. So that's all from me for now. I hope that's somewhat entertaining and inspired you a little bit. Thanks for your attention. Bye and stay safe.